Mr. Fox was a story from England. This next story is from Scotland. It isn't only people who have stories to tell sometimes, you know. Sometimes it's a place. In fact, so many stories are told about that place that it lives on for years and years, even when no one can quite find it again. Such a place was Cotterhaugh Wood. Cotterhaugh Wood was in the lowlands of Scotland, round about Selkirk, they say. In fact, they say you can even find it today if you know where to look. But I've not been there myself, so I don't know. But I do know that years ago Cotterhaugh Wood was spoken of in hushed and reverent tones by the folks who lived around there. There were many stories came out of there, stories of how people went in but never came out, stories of how it was a fairy place, a place of danger especially to young men and women, for they could be taken and brought to the Queen of Elfland and taught to serve her. Now Cotterhaugh Wood was located on the land of a laird who had a daughter named Janet. She was a bright young thing, stubborn sometimes, but mostly good-humored, full of fun, and the light of her father's life. She'd never seriously disobeyed him once, until, well, that's the story. It was the eve of her 16th birthday, and it's not quite clear what came over her, for she bound up her yellow gold hair, and she wrapped it around her head, and she bound up her kirtle to her knees, and she strode out over the moors, straight for Cotterhaugh Wood. As she passed through the heather and the broom, she dreamed of whatever young girls dream of, and got to Cotterhaugh before she knew it. And the forest was deep and dense, but right in the center was a glade, and in the very center of the glade was a well, all o'ergrown with roses. As she stepped up to the well, she could not help herself. She reached out and plucked a beautiful red rose, and then a white, and then a pink, and she held them up to her cheek and brushed them toward her lips, looking up, when she saw a man standing on the other side of the well, all dressed in green, gray eyes, very young. "Why have you called me to Cotterhaugh? What are you doing on my land?" Well, the spirited girl stood up. "What do you mean? Who am I? And what am I doing on your land? This land belongs to my father," said Janet stoutly. "I have every right to be here. And I didn't call you. Did you pick the rose?" "I did." "I am Tamlin, the Queen of Elfland's first knight. And when you pick a rose from that well, you summon me to you." Janet's heart skipped a beat. This was what she'd been warned of. She knew. But as she looked up, he wasn't frowning, he was smiling. And he said, "I'll not hurt you, Janet." And she knew he meant it. "Well, I'm glad," she said. "I wouldn't want them to be right." And he laughed. "Will you tarry a while with me, Janet, and talk?" And so she did. And the whole afternoon went so lovely. They walked and they talked, and they ate berries, and what do people talk about when they first meet? All those kinds of things. And it was almost dusk when Janet found herself skipping back over the heather, through the moors, back to home. And she said to herself, there was no harm done. And she had such lovely dreams. And then the next day, when she went about her chores, every other thought was of Tamlin. In fact, by afternoon, wouldn't you know it, she bound up that hair and was off across the moors again. She plucked a rose, and before she even looked up, she felt his presence. And he was smiling already, and confessed he'd hoped she'd summon him. And so they walked, and he held her hand, and her head dropped to his shoulder. And it was another lovely afternoon, just one of many lovely afternoons they spent together that summer. And it was coming on to fall when Janet realized that she would have Tamlin for her own, or she'd have no one at all. She said to him, "Tamlin, tell me true now. Are you mortal, or are you fairy?" He looked down and sad and said, "I was mortal once, the grandson of the Earl of Roxburgh. I was riding after him one day and had fallen behind, and so I took a shortcut through Cotterhow Wood. It was not the smart thing to do. I stumbled, and my horse stumbled, and I fell, and when I awoke, I was in Elfland, and the Queen of Fairy had taken me for her own. And I must admit, Janet, until I met you, I'd had no thought of leaving. But now I wish I could." "Oh, can't you?" she asked. "No," he said. "There's no way?" "Well, there is, but it's not for a girl. Maybe it's not even for a mortal at all to try and attempt. But you must tell me. You must tell me, Tamlin, and I will try. For I can't live without you. Janet, if you want to try truly, what you must do is, on Halloween night, just tomorrow, Halloween, we'll go riding, all of us, through the wood. How will I know you, Tamlin? For in the first group there will be all the knights riding on coal-black horses, Janet, and I'll not be among them. And in the second troop to go by, there'll be all brown horses, and I'll not be among them. But in the third troop you'll see the Queen of Elfland sitting higher than anybody else, and on her right there'll be a knight, and he'll have one hand gloved and one hand free. When you see that, Janet, you must leap up, and you must take the horse's bridle, and you must pull me off the horse. Dare you do that, Janet?" "Aye," she said. "Wait, there's more. When they know that I am away, Janet, they will change me. They will change me into all manner of shapes, meant to scare you to let me go. But you must not let me go, and you must not fear me. You must hang on. Can you do that, Janet?" "Aye," she said. "But wait, there's more. Then, you know, I'll be turned into a branch, a burning branch, Janet, so hot you'll want to throw it away, but you must throw it away only into the creek. For out of the creek I'll come, naked as the day I was born, and you must cover me with a cloak, Janet, and not let them see me. Can you do that, Janet?" "Aye," she said, and they parted. The next night, Halloween, when all intelligent people had barred their doors, built up their fires, and gone to bed, Janet slipped out through the window and waded across the moors to Miles Cross, where she knew he'd be. It was past midnight before Janet heard the jingle of the bridles, and that first troop did go by all in black, and the second on brown. And when she saw the third on milk-white steeds, and the Queen of Elfland taller than all, there was a knight by her side, with one gloved hand and one hand free. And she leaped up, and she grabbed the bridle, and she pulled him down, and she held on round his neck as hard as she could. And suddenly, "Tamlin's away!" rang out o'er the moor, and she held on with all her might. For then she was not holding Tamlin, she was holding a lizard, and it was scooting around in her hands, and it was fidgeting, and she couldn't hold on. But she did hold on, and it turned into a snake, and the snake's face was in her own, and it was spitting, and the tongue was darting out at her face, and she could barely hold on, but she did. And then it became a wolf, and the wolf's jaw was slavering, and its teeth were huge, and it bit at her face and her head and her shoulders, but she hung on for all she was worth. And then it was a bear, an enormous brown bear, and it lifted her off the ground, and it dashed her left and right. But she held on with all her hands and all that fur, and then it wasn't fur any more, but wings on the back of a hawk. and it pulled at her, trying to get away, but she held on and held it tight to her. And then suddenly, it was a burning branch. The branch burned so bright it burned her hands, and she foamed the creek and threw it. And out of that creek came a man as naked as the day was born, and she threw her cloak over him quickly and covered him up completely. And then the voice of the Queen of Elfland rang out, "Had I but known, Tamlin, Tamlin, a woman would ransom thee, I'd have taken out your 2 grey eyes and put in 2 eyes of tree. Had I but known, Tamlin, Tamlin, afore we'd come from home, I'd have taken out your heart of flesh and put in a heart of bone." And then she and all the fairies rode away. Now you may be asking yourself, how did Janet explain a naked man in a cloak to her father when they got home that night? That's not part of the story, so I don't know. But I do know that they were wed, and they lived many happy years together. And that, as they say, is that.